Ah, finally. My dreams of becoming a lawnmower have come true once again. The last time I got to experience a joy like this was when I covered the Steam Thrasher. Link to that below. But today we're going to be talking about the Husk Grinder, which is a very, very similar cousin of the Steam Thrasher, sporting very similar stats with a higher base chance to crit, a bit of a faster attack speed in the way that I spec'd it, but a slower native attack speed, and then of course a little bit of a higher impact just so that you can activate that fancy 6 perk. Now, the Husk Grinder, like the other black metal weapons, did get the update where you are now able to have a little bit of extra damage to the nature enemies. So running these weapons fire is basically the best way to go now. You don't really want to do it physical unless you're in like Stonewood, Plankerton, or Canny. But on that note, I am getting ahead of myself. I just wanted to mention the fact that it has very, very similar stats to the Steam Thrasher. So if you're looking for a very similar experience and that you can spin around and deal lots of damage with that heavy attack, you have come to the right place. So the Husk Grinder is, as I said, very similar to the Steam Thrasher in that you don't really want to use its main attack. It doesn't swing very fast. I did put attack speed on mine, but I'll talk about the perks later on and why I'm not really going to recommend that. It is rather nice to be using it in its normal state. You don't need to rely on having energy, but energy is pretty easy to manage. If you have, like I always say, one of the big three, if you have Dino Southie for the constant energy regeneration of Blast of the Past, which you're going to want anyway because you're going to have Paleo Luna giving you that extra damage because she is just the best melee hero to have, or you can have Anti-Cuddle Sarah giving you extra energy upon eliminations, and then of course there is the Fall in Love Ranger Jonesy. Now, those are the big three, the classic three, but there is also Dennis. I've not really utilized him much. I have heard that his burgers are textured now, but you guys can explore that on your own. My rule that I always say is that you either want two of those heroes that I just mentioned in the support or any one of them in the lead, and then you should have enough energy regeneration to keep that spin going. A couple of things to mention is that there are heavy attack efficiency perks that you can put on the weapon, and then of course there is a heavy attack efficiency perk on a hero that you can throw into your support as well. She will keep you in the fight and is definitely a good recommendation. I of course forgot her name, but I put her on the screen so you guys can check her out. Now, as for the damage, it is a slightly bit less than the Steam Thrasher. The Steam Thrasher does have less overall damage, but you're able to run an extra damage against the slow and snared enemies, which gives it a little bit of extra damage on those second hits. I felt like the Husk Grinder was doing perfectly adequate damage though. I feel like it might have been because I was running Luna. That adds a lot of extra damage for sure, but with crowd clearing, it's just fantastic. You can absolutely cleave through crowds of enemies, mow them down if you will, delete everything in sight, and I really found like it was a pretty decent way to go. Spinning around like a top is fun and all, you know, I haven't had these kind of joys since Beyblade, but there are kind of other ways that suit my personal playstyle, except that I do know that a lot of people actually tend to prefer these kind of weapons, so if you're into that kind of thing, of course the Husk Grinder is going to be great for you. Single target damage is definitely where it suffers though. I feel like everybody who uses these weapons knows exactly what I'm talking about, where you come up against a Smasher or a Mist Monster or a mini boss and you just make no progress. It's really, really tough to eliminate them. I was personally capable in my single player here, but it was not the best way to... Honestly, even with a melee loadout, I could have just thrown on an AR or an SMG or a shotgun and done the job a lot faster. Now, if you're going to be running the Husk Grinder and you want to perk it to maximum efficiency, let's talk about all the different options here because I feel like there are a lot of different ways to go. So, I already touched on the element. I highly recommend fire. If you're in Stonewood, Plankerton, Canny, or very early Twine potentially, you can kind of get away with physical, but even in Twine Peaks or late Canny, you're definitely going to want an element just anyway because elemental zombies will be more and more common, and this will basically be your nature enemy eliminator, which is kind of unfortunate because nature enemies will hit you and drain your energy, but as I already mentioned, there are lots of answers to getting more energy back faster, and then of course you have that extra damage to nature enemies. I do believe that's the best way to go. I think the extra damage to nature is certainly the preferred, but if you have any of the other two damaging perks, you do have a couple of options. So first and foremost, you have the bonus damage based on missing health. That is going to be a little tricky if you're using Blast from the Past and Paleo Luna. I'm somebody who just likes to stay healthy. I think Paleo Luna's bonus damage with your extra health is significantly more damage than this fifth perk will give you, but you can kind of run that if you're sort of, you know, planning on staying low HP, but when you're stuck in the animation of spinning around, I really don't think that's safe, and it's really hard to control that. Not to mention, if you just run heavy attack efficiency down here, which as I mentioned, you're kind of going to want anyway, you have room for a crit rating double crit damage build. And this is where I talked about attack speed not really being the best way to go. With an attack speed perk, we're only down to 0.75 seconds per shot, essentially, which is really slow. That is... barely fast enough to just swing normally. You might as well just use the heavy attack and spin around a little bit in that case. I don't think attack speed actually did anything for me. It doesn't speed up your heavy attack. You won't spin around any faster. It's just going to be kind of a dead perk most of the time. So I think an extra crit damage perk is definitely the way to go, because as you can see here with Whiteout Fiona in my support, 55.5% of the time I'm critting. When your crit chance is that freaking high, I have no reason to suggest anything other than a crit build. I mean, there's just no reason not to. Unless you want to go the extra credit route of running maybe a damage perk instead of crit rating and totally rocking out. If you're willing to have totally rocking out, it'll be a lot less safe, you'll be a lot more frail, and you'll take a lot more damage. But you will have the added benefit of swinging faster because of totally rocking out's ability, and a really, really nice crit rating bonus from the team perk itself. So that'll give you a lot of chances to crit, a much faster swing speed if you're not using the heavy attack, and it'll make you a lot more frail. I don't have any gameplay of that because that's really not the way that I want to run this weapon, but if you're somebody who likes to do that, then you've kind of got your answer. But that's pretty much it. There's not really any other way to spec this weapon. You got a couple of optional perks, but ultimately I think that crit rating double crit damage is probably the way to go. I'm sure that was an expected answer, but I do like to mention that there are other ways to run this if you want to maximize some efficiency. For example, if you're using the heavy attack efficiency in the support, you might be able to run damage to miss monsters and bosses because, as I mentioned, those are the enemies that are going to be giving you the most trouble. Or you could just run an extra damage perk and enjoy the extra damage from that. So there you go. That's pretty much the Husk grinder. I already sort of talked about the loadout. I suppose it's fair to mention that I did flash it on screen, but this is what I was running. Anatomy lessons, again, from Whiteout Fiona is just really, really nice to have. And I opted for rapid charge because that's just sort of my preferred. Of course, I mentioned Dennis and the Fallen Leverage Jonesy. Those are perfectly good alternatives. But of course, Saurian Focus is an obvious pick because I'm running Blast in the past, and then Coconuts and all that are pretty standard anyway. I feel like that was a pretty solid way to go. If you guys enjoyed this video and you guys want to support the channel, feel free to use code Mista at your checkout. You guys can become a channel member here. This is one of the last black metal weapons that I had yet to cover. This might be the last, but I don't want to say that because there's always one that I'm forgetting. All of them will be linked in the description below. If I missed any, of course, I'll update that list as we go. So if you guys want to check out any of the other black metal weapons, you can do so down there. I did cover the Dirge song earlier today, so if you're watching this upon release, that video is definitely up and certainly worth watching. Check out the top 10 weapons video, recent upload of mine, big video. It'll be recommended at the end of this. And if you guys want to check out any of my streams, you guys can go down to the description below, click that Twitch link, and hit follow. I'd really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a nice day. And then